Please welcome Mr. Larry Rudebusch.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon. Yes, my name is Larry Rudebusch. Some of you know me, many of you don't, so I'll give you a little brief background. I grew up on a farm in South Dakota. I obtained a degree in civil engineering from South Dakota State. I worked in the construction industry for about 14 years. And towards the end of that career, I spent quite a bit of time overseas, working in some of the poverty pockets of the world. Worked on a project in Hungary. Spent 2.5 years working in Egypt. And I spent about 1.5 years working in Vietnam. After the Vietnam project, I came home, quit my job. Things happened. My parents passed away. I ended up taking over the family farm. And I've been struggling for quite a few years trying to figure out how to make this work. My standard of living has dropped every year that I've been back on the farm. When I went back and looked, I found that when I started running the numbers, I found that my standard of living had been dropping all along due to inflation. It really wasn't that apparent, but it was after I took over a business and tried to run a business. It was because of that I wanted to understand what was going on, and that required that I had to go and study economics. Fortunately, back in the early 80s, my father gave me a book. The title of the book was Unforgiven by Charles Walters. So I ended up studying raw materials economics, fortunately. History-based economics, not theory-based economics. Randy Cook spoke earlier today on this. And a few years after that, again, it was at the insistence of Charles Walters. He suggested that we read Steve Zarlenga's book, The Lost Science of Money, which I did. And I put those two together, and everything came together. And with that knowledge, that gave me the confidence to take this message publicly. I felt we understand now what's causing the problem, the root cause, and therefore we know how to solve the problem. I started, as Steve said, I've been a member of AMI for, 3 or 4 years. I started a chapter in South Dakota. Steve came out in May of last year, 2006. But I'm not going to talk about that chapter activity today. I'm going to talk about, as Steve said, I'm going to talk about my campaign for the U.S. House of Representatives last year in South Dakota. I'd like to explain why I ran. Well, I've kind of given you an answer already because of the way the farm was running. The things were happening. My standard of living kept going down. But when you look at it, it's not just a farm problem. The problem is all over the economy. And I start looking at some of the long-term trends and start to quantify how bad things are. It gives you the incentive to try to fix this. Because if these trends continue, it's hard to believe things can get worse, but if they do, and they can if we don't turn these trends around. As you know, you've heard many speakers here talk about the debt load. Well, our debt load, according to my numbers, at the end of 2006, total federal, public and private debt is about $48 trillion. But our national income for that year was only $10 trillion. This is one of the points I tried to drive home during my campaign. Technically, we're insolvent. We don't generate enough income to cover our costs, including all of this debt. Another problem is, of course, our tax burden. Pre-New Deal, the federal government, total government, federal, state, and local government only consumed 12% of total national income. That's not much. That's probably sustainable. In 2005, the government consumed 43% of total national income. Obviously, the government is too large. That's unsustainable. We cannot support that big of a government. It's consuming too much of our national income. Back in 1928, the average person only had to work about 1.3 months out of the year to pay their tax bill. In 2005, a person had to work it was 1.4 months. Now they have to work about 5.3 months out of the year to support the government. This is unsustainable. So, and because of this, government has grown so much. We've seen a tremendous shift in power. We've seen a shift of power away from the people who are supposed to be self-governing and controlling this government. We've seen that shift of power from them to the government. And now the government is controlling us. We are no longer self-governing. This is a recipe for disaster. These are some of the points I drove home during my campaign, trying to get the people to understand where they really were. People have become acclimated to this economy. They don't put a lot of thought into what's going on. The average family in this country works 2.5 jobs trying to make ends meet. If you go back to the early 50s, I think you could argue that one wage earner could provide a pretty good living for a pretty good sized family without the debt, without having to take on much debt, and of course with a much lower tax burden, much less government regulation. These are all points I tried to drive home during my campaign. But we understand the root cause of all this is this privately controlled, debt-based money system. So again, the focus of my campaign was monetary reform. This is the only thing that's going to turn this around. I decided it was time, we've got the accumulated knowledge. It's time to take action. I have the chapter, yes, but through the campaign, I could reach, even with my limited resources, I could reach more people with this basic message. Many times people have asked me, why run as a Libertarian, as a third-party candidate, when you have no chance to win? Well, let me tell you why. About 10 years ago, I sat down and I started studying the long-term track records of the Republican and Democratic parties. The Democratic Party goes back to the time of Jefferson. The Republican Party goes back to the time of Lincoln, roughly. They've been around a long time. They have been controlling and they have been operating our government on our behalf, supposedly to benefit the general welfare of all of the people. Obviously, they haven't done that very well at all. Based on that long-term track record, if we're going to turn this around, if we're going to have monetary reform, we're going to have political reform. It means we're going to have to reform the Republican and Democratic parties to push this through. I came to the conclusion that based on their long-term track record and the fact that those parties are controlled from the top down instead of the bottom up, meaning the people aren't controlling those parties anymore, the special interests are controlling them from the top down, I came to the conclusion that it's not possible to reform those two parties. And therefore, we could not obtain monetary reform with those two parties. I think I'm correct when I say that those two parties, in general, based on their actions, do not see any problem with this privately controlled, debt-based money system. They don't see a problem with the Federal Reserve and fractional reserve banking. Am I wrong? I think I'm right. Now, the Libertarian Party is a relatively new party, started up in the early 1970s. At this point, they're still controlled from the bottom up by the people. It does not cater to special interests. And in regards to this privately controlled, debt-based money system, at least the Libertarian Party has been advocating getting rid of the Federal Reserve. So that puts them ahead of the other two parties in my eyes. The problem is the Libertarian Party drops the ball at that point. They don't know what to do. They do not fully understand the nature of money. But bear in mind, neither do the other two parties. But I still think they're a little bit ahead. I think since they're controlled from the bottom up instead of the top down, we'd have a better chance of working with that party for monetary reform and straightening them out about the nature of money than we would with these other two parties, which are now controlled from the top down. Because the reform is going to have to come from the people. Major change throughout history, major change has never been initiated from within government that I'm aware of. Major change has always come from the private sector, from the people, either individuals or small groups like this. It's not going to come from within our existing government. Those are some of the reasons why I run with the Libertarian Party. The main focus of the Libertarian Party is to try to reduce the size of government to where it is at a manageable size, where the people can once again control it. We're supposed to be self-governing in this nation. It means we, the people, are supposed to control the government. We've clearly lost that ability. We've clearly lost that ability. So that's the response I give when people ask me, why do I run with the Libertarian Party? Additionally, looking at this thing historically, I think the time is right. If we're going to see major change, when we do monetary reform, that's going to be major change. And I think the time is right for some major change on this political system. And I don't think we can, I do not think it's possible to reform those two parties, considering that they're controlled from the top down. So if we're going to do monetary reform, we need to think about this. This is the action I've already taken. On top of all that, of course, the big effort is going to have to be education, because if it's going to be grassroots, we've got to educate the people. Everybody here knows and understands that there's a tremendous void of knowledge amongst the general population concerning even the fundamentals of our monetary system and of basic macroeconomics. Our education system has failed. It's our responsibility to rebuild it. That's the major effort, grassroots effort of this organization. If we're going to get monetary reform to go through, we got to educate enough of the people to push through both the political reform and monetary reform, as I see it. Now, running as a third-party candidate, I came up against a lot of obstacles, as you might guess. Well, anybody running for office, even with the major parties, run up against a lot of obstacles. One of mine was time, of course. I work full-time. I run the farm by myself, so I didn't leave a lot of time to run a campaign. But I felt it was worth the sacrifice, and I'll probably do it again. I feel I don't really have a choice. We're not going to get change through this established political system. It's not going to happen. Time was a problem. Money was a problem, of course. I had no money. The farm, we can't generate enough money on the farm to even support me, let alone have excess money to run a campaign. No staff. The Libertarian Party in South Dakota is very small. Another big obstacle is the media. Media doesn't support change. It doesn't support third parties, obviously. So there's another obstacle. You either go around or go through, but they're not going to help. They're not going to help with monetary reform either. They didn't help me with my campaign, and they're not going to help with monetary reform. We have to figure out a way to go around them. And I think education, as difficult as that is, that's the only way to make this work. So on top of all those things, the biggest problem was that there's just a total lack of knowledge out there regarding how our money system works, how basic economics, macroeconomics functions, including the trade issue. There's nothing but confusion out there, or just an absence, complete absence of knowledge. It's quite an indictment against our education system. Sadly, in particular, the economics profession, I'm sorry to say. I got a college degree, never had any instruction at all about the money system through all my years of public schooling. One semester of economics. And in looking back at what they taught in economics, I would have been better off not having anything. And I'm serious.
Bingo.
So my campaign, I tried to focus on the education, beginning the education process by focusing on the fundamentals of our monetary system, how it works, and you have to include some fundamentals of economics so they can tie it together. I basically stuck with monetary reform as the focus of my campaign as laid out by the American Monetary Institute. However, I had to go a little bit farther than that. I had to talk about the Monetary Reform Act. As far as I know, doesn't really address the foreign trade issue. So I had to include that. The people need a complete answer to the economic problem. They need an economic solution, not just a monetary solution for the time being. They need the complete economic solution. So we have to address the foreign trade. Foreign trade is actually part of the monetary issue. If you study the Constitution, the government is supposed to assure equity of trade. We can't have equity of trade due to the differences in the purchasing power of our money system versus the purchasing power of money systems in these foreign countries. Those discrepancies can give those foreign producers a market price advantage. Our government is supposed to regulate our money system to overcome that. They're supposed to regulate foreign trade. They're supposed to regulate the value of our money and of foreign money as required by the Constitution. The government does not do that at all. It doesn't perform that monetary duty. It doesn't perform any monetary duties. As you all know, they turned it all over to the private banking sector. So as you know, AMI is more involved with the nature of money. We know that money is not wealth and that money is not credit. As I said earlier, I'm a member of AMI. I'm also a member of the National Organization for Raw Materials. And as you're familiar with that, Randy Cook spoke today. He spoke at the last two conferences on raw materials economics and ag parity and how to use that to regulate the purchasing power of money. It's historically proven. I had to bring that into my campaign too so that I could give them a complete package and get the education process started. My real focus was education. I used the campaign as a tool to leverage the few resources that I had. As I'll go into in a few minutes, I got some exposure statewide. I got some coverage, so I reached some people, and I'll go through that in a minute and explain about how much exposure I got. But AMI deals with the nature of money. Norm deals with the nature of wealth. It deals with the origin and distribution of wealth, and it incorporates the nature of money. And it gives us a complete package because it shows us how to stabilize the purchasing power of money so that money functions as a benefit to society instead of a burden to the many and a privilege or a benefit to the few, as it does today. So what kind of results did I get? Running as a third-party candidate, which the media doesn't like. One thing I found, though, is that I think the media kind of reflects the emotions of the voters and of the citizens. The media doesn't anticipate trends. It doesn't anticipate what should be done. It reflects what the people are feeling. The problem I found all through the campaign, all the questions that came up, most of the questions that came up were economic questions. The people cannot earn enough income to maintain their standard of living. That's the basic problem, as they see it through their eyes. So they need assistance. They need handouts from the government, or some of them go and become complete dependents on government. Most of the problems, the questions that were presented were economic in origin, which was lucky for me because that falls right into the monetary reform area, since it's their money system that's causing their economic problems. So I was on 2 televised debates. Again, I'm a third-party candidate, no money, no staff. I was able to get on 2 televised debates, one that covered most of East River, South Dakota. So I took the monetary message to that half of the state. I was also on PBS, Public Broadcasting, sponsored a debate. That was broadcast over the entire state. Most of those questions that came up in that debate were also economic questions. Again, nobody has any income. So I was able to, of course, my opponents, that's the hot button issue. But what did my opponents do? Did they tell them why they were in that condition and how to get out of it, what the government should do to solve the problem? No. They said, you elect me, I'll go to Washington, I'll grab as much money as I can get my arms around, I'll come back and I'll give you all some. And we'll all live happily ever after. It's funny, but it worked. The incumbent Democrat was reelected. The people lacked the knowledge to understand this at this time. But that C-SPAN debate, I focused again on the monetary reform. It was broadcast live. I think it was rebroadcast twice. And it was, I come to find out later, I got 2 emails, one from Florida and one from Arizona, telling me that they liked my performance on the debate. They had seen it on C-SPAN. So it went that one went national. One of the TV stations also taped my answers to 3 of their questions. They put one on the nightly news, and all 3 of them were put on their TV station newscast, or website, I'm sorry. I met with the editorial board of one of the newspapers, one of the major newspapers in the States. Had a lot of newspapers send me questions, which I responded, which were printed. So I had pretty good coverage considering the obstacles that I was up against. 3 radio interviews. Unfortunately, the biggest city in South Dakota is Sioux Falls, and that's the biggest newspaper, and they absolutely refused to cover my campaign. They would not even mention my name. They would not say that I was running. They would only cover the 2 major party candidates, the Republican and Democrat. That's a problem.
What newspaper? Do you know who owns that newspaper?
Oh, I was the Sioux Falls Argus leader. That's all I know.
Republican or Democrat?
Democrat. They
it was part of a conglomerate.
I don't know, but they wouldn't cover me. But again, I guess to sum it up, my biggest problem was the fact that the citizens just don't have any knowledge of this subject. So,
Questions?
yes.